4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, everybody? I fix it in your face. Don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe for the information I'm about to give you. I hope this helps. Help me, help you, help me. Yeah, it's free. It doesn't cost you anything. Just do me a favor. Come on, help other people see this video. It's really what this is about. That's why I created the whole channel. So help me, help you. Let's get into this discussion. I'm going to try to tell you guys how to choose your first bike from my opinion, my standpoint. Let's go. I've been riding motorcycles for years. I work on them, I repair them all day. I have personal bikes. I buy lots of motorcycles and repair them constantly. I service a little bit of everything at my house, including jet skis, whatever. You name it, I've probably touched it. I have owned probably over 70 bikes in the past 5 years, and I have worked on hundreds of different bikes. I have watched new riders come into the scene, and I have watched riders leave the scene, whether they were alive or just chose not to ride because it wasn't for them. It happens. So I'm going to try to help you figure out the best bike to get into with a little bit of information, and hopefully this guide will help set you up for a good riding experience, a proper riding experience, something that you're going to have fun and grow into. So let's get started. All right, so I think the first thing to do is establish your budget. What you're really working with as far as expenditure goes is going to determine a lot about your riding experience, to be honest with you. You want to make sure that your first riding experience is a good one. And that normally means that you have to spend a little bit more money. So I'm going to try to give you some budgeting areas that you can understand. If you spend this amount, this is pretty much what you're going to end up with. So let's say you only have a budget of $1,500. What you're going to end up with normally is a project bike. Most likely it won't be running, and if it is, it's probably not going to be running very good, and it's going to need a lot of maintenance. It's also most likely going to be a carbureted motorcycle. And a couple things to think about with that is that most shops do not work on carbureted bikes anymore, which means you'll be doing the majority of the work yourself on the bike. If you do happen to end up with a reasonable one for $1,500, most likely it's going to be a cruiser or a very, very small sport bike. Nothing in the 600cc class range. It'll be very rare if you're going to find anything for a reasonable price that's fuel injected, that has a reasonable amount of power, and is going to be reliable. If you have about $1,500 to work with, you're most likely going to end up with a project bike. And I'm not against project bikes because I pick them up all the time, and I absolutely love project bikes. Bikes don't start becoming reliable normally until you hit the price range of about $2,500 to $3,500. And in those price ranges, you can normally get a cruiser or a sport bike that is going to have fuel injection. It might be high mileage. If you're lucky, you'll get one with low mileage, but for the most part, you're probably going to end up with a little bit on the higher end of the mileage for that kind of money. So like I said, sometimes I get very, very lucky with my finds, and I'll find something in the $2,000 price range that'll end up being low mileage, just needs a little bit of work, and it ends up being a great bike. But I also know what I'm doing, and I know how to repair these things myself without taking it to a shop. So remember, if you're spending low, you're most likely going to be picking up a project bike, and you're going to be doing the work yourself, unless you have the money to take it to a shop. But then my suggestion is, if you have the money to take it to a shop, you should probably just buy a bike that doesn't have problems anyways. Spend the extra money. You don't have to worry about whether you got screwed in the end or not. Budget has a lot to do with it. You know, I always suggest that new riders don't buy new bikes because you're going to crash. You're going to fall, whether it's a parking lot, out on the street. Everybody has their wreck. Okay, it just happens. It's not how, it's always when. When will it happen? You could be an experienced rider your entire life, and I will guarantee you at some point you will have a slide, accident, a small crash, whether it's a lay down in a parking lot, whatever. It happens to the best of us. Okay, so it's better to start with a starter bike, something small. So let's get into that. So you're going to spend, if you're $1,500, most likely project bike. $2,000, you might get lucky, find something reasonable. $3,000 to $3,500, you're probably going to get a fairly good bike that needs a very small amount of maintenance, is most likely fuel injected, and that's for cruiser or sport bikes. I mean, that's just the reality of it. You have to spend a little bit. Now, if you have more money and you say, heck, I want a new bike, by all means, I'm not going to stop you from doing that. Go buy yourself a new bike, but don't be upset if you lay it down your first week of riding it, second or third week, because we make mistakes. And then you have a new bike that you just bought that you're still paying on or fully paid off, and now it's had an accident, there's scratches on it, and you know, a lot harder to sell it without replacing the plastics and things. This is why we have starter bikes. That's pretty much what I'm trying to get you to understand. That's why we have starter bikes. So let's go to the second stage here. Prior riding experience. So basically, some people have ridden dirt bikes and maybe scooters or things like that. That will actually have a major impact on jumping into riding, because if you already have a little bit of knowledge under your belt and you've been riding these other crafts or these other machines on the road, then you're probably going to have a much easier time transitioning into riding motorcycles, especially if you're coming off the dirt bike or four-wheeler scene. It's going to pretty much come natural to you. But the power is different. It lays down power radically different than, let's say, a dirt bike does or a four-wheeler. You know, your street bikes, normally you get a 250. If you've been riding dirt bikes your whole life, you understand that most of those have power bands and they're really, really fast, and you get a 250, you're like, this thing's not fast. You're probably ready for a 500 or a 600 if you've been riding, you know, up to 200cc, you know, dirt bikes and stuff. You're probably just going to be fine with jumping right into a 600 class street bike or 600cc cruiser. Actually, you'd probably be more in line for an 800cc cruiser and a 600cc sport bike if you have any prior riding experience. Now, if you're coming off something as small as a scooter, 50cc, 150cc, something like that, something with minimal amount of power, you're going to want a starter bike. You're going to want to settle for something in the 250cc class range. You have a lot to adjust to, especially going much, much faster, a lot quicker. So just be aware that prior riding experience will definitely determine where you should be jumping in at in your world of buying a motorcycle as a first starter bike. Like I said, if you already have experience, reasonable experience behind dirt bikes and stuff, you're going to probably just feel right at home with a 600cc street bike or 800cc cruiser. You're going to have a great time. It's going to be an enjoyable ride. It won't take you long to get, you know, used to the machine that you're riding. But for everybody else, I would say start with a 250cc class, especially, and they have cruisers in 250 and they have street bikes in 250cc. And if you're really feeling yourself, 300cc. And if you want just a little bit more than that, the 400cc Ninja is pretty darn good, I would say, as a starter bike. It's going to be a little bit more powerful, but it'll still be reasonable and manageable for most of you guys to learn. But if you're just coming off a 50cc scooter, get a 300cc or a 250cc. I promise you, you're going to want to do that. Those bigger bikes are going to have a lot more power. They're going to be a lot more scary, and they're going to get you in a troublesome circumstance much, much faster. So that's my advice there. Let's move on. Choosing a motorcycle that fits your needs can be a little on the difficult side, especially when it comes to understanding fuel injection versus carburetor. Fuel injection will give you a lot less problems, but when it does have a problem, it's normally computer-driven systems, which means it's going to have DTC codes, and if you don't have a code reader, you're most likely going to end up going to a shop, and they're going to have to diagnose the bike. It's the same thing with carburetors, except, like I said, most shops don't work on carburetors. So if you're not familiar with carburetors, you probably want to stay away from carbureted bikes. If you're willing to take on the learning curve, carburetors can be a lot of fun, especially because, in my opinion, they are my favorite type of bike to ride, because if your starter fails or your battery dies or any of the above, you're not going to be stuck with a bike that's fuel injected that you can't get started again. You just push start a carbureted bike. If your starter fails and your battery is dead, you can literally just push it up to speed like you would a car that's stick shift, drop the clutch in second gear, and it'll start right up and you can just go home. That's not really options that are available to you on fuel injected bikes. So when it comes to emergency circumstances, I would say that carburetor is the better way to go. But once again, phasing out technology, shops don't really work on them. You're probably going to have a better riding experience with fuel injected, but when it does present you with problems, it can get really difficult to solve those problems without proper diagnosing. So just throwing that out there. Some bikes have automatic DCC code readers built right into the ECU that you turn the key a couple times or press a couple buttons and then it brings up the codes and then you just look up the codes. Sometimes you get lucky. It tells you, your bike will tell you what the problems are. Most of the time though, you have to hook them up to a code reader, bring it to a shop if you don't have the code reader, and they have to diagnose it for you. So just be aware that there's definitely differences between choosing a carbureted motorcycle and a fuel injection. Both of them offer really interesting sides of riding, and I think both of them should be experienced at one point or another. But I think by today's standards, fuel injection is kind of the way to go, unless you're old school like me and you're kind of the retro guy, you like the older stuff. Well then, hey, guess what? The best thing to do is probably get yourself a carbureted bike, because you're going to have a lot of fun, and then that's part of it. The tuning aspect is the fun part of it for me. So, but that's not for everybody, especially if you're new to the riding scene and you don't know anything about carbs. My suggestion is go with fuel injection. Let's go on to the next step here. Ride type. What do you want? You want a sporty ride? You want a cruise? You want best of both worlds? What type of bike are you looking for? There's so many different types of motorcycles. You have to ask yourself what type of riding you want to do. And a lot of that is area based. If you live in an area where you have lots of backcountry roads, cruisers are fun, man, on backcountry roads. Just wind on your face, loud noise and pipes. You know, if you live out in the mountains and you got the twisties, cruiser's probably not your route. You want to go with something sporty and you want to rip through the turns and the corners and have a little bit of fun on the twisties. Or if you're like, you like to travel, but you also like to sport, you like to cruise, but you also like the sport side. Hey, guess what? They make sport cruisers. So you can do a sport bike mixed with a cruiser. You know, they have tons of those. FZ600s, the Phaser 600s, those are sport touring bikes. ST1300, sport touring, FJ. The FJ is a sport touring. There's tons of sport touring bikes out there that are going to put down a massive amount of power, ride like a sport bike, or just be as comfortable as a cruiser and have fun with your buddies. But I think a lot of that is going to be determined by the area you live in. If you live in a congested area, is a sport bike really for you if you're in a congested area? You know, I live in Florida. Sport bikes are not fun here year round because there's so much traffic. It's just ridiculous. I'd rather be on a cruiser, to be honest with you. I think I'd have a more enjoyable experience and ride rather than leaning over for hours in traffic, inching my way through things, trying to get, you know, to the head of the pack just to get back on the road after sitting in traffic for an hour with my bike just running. You know, I think I'd rather have an upright seating position. So I think area has a lot to do with riding and what your choice of a bike is going to be. So just consider that. There's tons of different types of bikes. Yeah, you even have enduro class, on-road, off-road stuff, you know. Don't cut yourself short. Look into all different types of bikes. Each one is going to offer you a different circumstance and a different experience, and it's good to try to experience all of those. So last but not least, growth. A lot of times people will choose a bike that won't grow with them. Ideally, as a beginner, when you're first getting into bikes, you're probably going to choose something a little bit on the smaller CC side, and that's fine. If you're coming off scooters and stuff, I would say no matter what, stick with something in the 250cc range. If you're not, you're going to want to get a bike that's going to grow with you a little bit so that you can kind of get used to the power and then push the bike harder and further, right? And that's what happens to all riders. The more comfortable you become with your machine, the more you start pushing it, the further your skills get. That's why it's always good to try to choose a bike if you're already slightly experienced. It's going to offer you a little bit more pizzazz as you get to know the machine. So, you know, if you're already used to dirt bikes and stuff, get a 600. Because in my mind, the only real jump up from a 600, it's not a 750, it's not a 650, it's not a 900. It's 600 straight to 1,000. That is the only jump that I logically can see, and that's because this has short rod throw pistons. The 600 class has short throw pistons, which means that the RPM range on a 600 is nasty. Absolutely nasty. They just produce so much steam because the pistons are so short. They can throw them much faster than, say, a V-twin or a parallel twin, where you have these long rods that only reach, you know, 10 and 12,000 RPMs if you're lucky. I mean, heck, most inline four-cylinder 600 class can reach 17,000 and 19,000 rev limiter. So you're making steam at those RPMs. That thing is putting down some serious power to pavement, even in the 600 class. So the only jump up I really see from a 600 is just bypassing the rest of them, going straight to a 1,000. You can tolerate it and handle it if you've had a reasonable 600cc street bike, newer street bike. If you're going from a 600, let's say a 2022, 600 class straight up to a 1000, you'll be just fine. You'll learn the power management of the big bike really quickly because you'll be used to that kind of power already. So that's something to think about there. Get a bike that will grow with you. If you're already slightly experienced, you probably want to choose something that's going to grow with you. So, even if you're coming off dirt bikes, like I said, your real jump up right there is already going to be like a 500 or 600cc. You don't need the 400, 300, 250 class. I promise you, those bikes are going to feel way too normal to you. They're going to feel weak. You're not going to get the riding experience that you're looking for. A 500cc or a 600cc street bike or cruiser up to an 800cc to, heck, even a 883, a 900, all those bikes are going to feel really comfortable to you. But new riders, stick to your 250 class, 300 class tops. Those bikes will grow with you for a good year, maybe two, if you decide to keep it for that long. Your jump up from there is going to be from a 250 or 300. You can jump right into 600 class, get used to that, and then whatever your next bump up is going to be. So I hope this helped you guys kind of choose your motorcycle and kind of have a better understanding as to how to choose a good first starter bike for yourself. I've ridden a lot of bikes in my life, and each one has offered me a different experience. I've ridden small stuff, large stuff, really fast stuff, stupid slow stuff, stuff that wasn't meant to be on the road, stuff that was meant to be on the road. Pretty much put my hands on everything. And I got to tell you, each one offers a different experience. Anytime my friends offer me the chance to ride their bike, I take it because I might be missing out on something I didn't realize I could have, So I love it. All right, guys, don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Thanks for sticking around. Toodles.